There's a lot to unpack here with Undertone, and I mean that in the best possible way because this is one of those horror films where the more you think about what it's doing, the more layers start revealing themselves. Not just in the story, but in the filmmaking, the sound design, the visual composition, the themes around pregnancy and guilt, and the way the film slowly builds tension all deserve a closer look. The film centers around Evie, who conducts podcasts from the dining room of her childhood home. She has a microphone, a computer, and a colleague that she calls, who is Justin, who lives in London. They connect remotely and begin recording their show together. The subject they're exploring is a set of strange audio files that appear to document disturbing events happening inside another home. The recordings they're listening to revolve around a couple expecting a baby. The husband has started recording strange things happening at night, his pregnant wife sleepwalking, speaking in unsettling ways, and strange sounds echoing through the house. The kind of things that are creepy enough that you start documenting them just to prove you're not losing your mind. So Evie and Justin begin playing these files and discussing them on the show, but early in the story, Evie discovers that she herself is pregnant. And that moment changes how you experience everything that comes after, because now the horror in those recordings isn't just something happening to someone else. The movie suddenly becomes about two pregnancies unfolding at the same time. That mirror becomes the central tension of the film. Every time Evie presses play on another file, you start wondering if she's listening to someone else's nightmare or a preview of her own future. And that film leans into that idea by stacking different kinds of horror on top of each other. There's the audio horror of the recordings themselves, voices speaking in sleep, sounds that shouldn't be there, and the feeling that something is happening inside that other house that no one can quite explain. Then there's the pregnancy horror. Not the glowing cinematic version of motherhood, but the anxious version, the uncertain version, the version where you're not sure what you want or what you're ready for. And Evie is living in the house she grew up in, taking care of her sick mother upstairs. And that house carries a lot of weight of religious imagery, expectations, in the sense that the environment itself is judging the decisions she's trying to process. So when the story begins touching on folklore surrounding a demonic entity connected to miscarriages, suddenly the horror becomes more than just supernatural. Now it's emotional, now it's personal, now it's moral, and that's where the movie starts doing something interesting, because Undertone doesn't rely on jump scares to keep you engaged. It relies on filmmaking craft. One of the most effective techniques the director uses in something called negative space. That's when a character occupies only a small portion of the frame and the rest of the image is left open. Directors use that space to create tension because the audience begins scanning the entire frame, looking for movement. And this movie does that constantly, and Evie is often framed inside wide shots of the house where large parts of that image are empty. Hallways, doorways, the staircase leading upstairs to her mother's room. Your brain starts searching those spaces. You start wondering if something might appear in the background. Sometimes nothing happens, but the tension keeps building because the viewer is now doing half the work. Your imagination is filling in the parts of the frame that the film refuses to explain. And the sound design makes it even more effective. And watching it at the Dolby Theater really highlights how much attention the filmmakers put into the audio. Sound moves through a room, a noise that seems distant might suddenly feel much closer. The recordings Evie is listening to begin blending with the sounds of the house itself. And because the entire film takes place inside this one house, that sound becomes incredibly important. We never leave that location, no exterior shots, no cutting away to another place. The camera stays inside the home the entire time, which means the filmmakers have to rely on sound composition and the performances to keep the story engaging. And here's the part that makes that even more impressive. The reported budget for this film was around $500,000. A24 eventually picked up the film and put a little bit more support behind it, helping it bring it to a wider audience and giving it a proper theatrical presentation. Even with that added backing, the core of the movie is still a small contained production that the fact that it looks this polished and sounds this good is honestly remarkable. Seeing it at the Dolby Theater really highlights the craft behind it. The audio design is layered and the cinematography is clean and the house feels like its fully realized environment rather than a simple set. And that brings me to Nina Kiri, who plays Evie. This is a performance that carries a lot of responsibility because the character spends much of the film alone in the house reacting to the recordings and processing what they might mean for her own life. And Kiri does a really solid job grounding the film emotionally. It may not be a breakout star moment, but it's definitely the kind of performance that makes you curious to see what she does next. But the thing that will probably define people's reaction to Undertone is the ending. This is not a film that rushes to explain everything. It leans fully into the atmosphere and ambiguity, which means audiences are going to split into two camps. Some viewers are going to appreciate the slow burn tension and the eerie filmmaking styles. Others are going to walk away wanting clearer answers about what exactly they just watched. And when the credits rolled at my screening, people stayed in their seats talking about it. Groups were debating what it meant, comparing interpretations, trying to piece together the final moments. And honestly, that might be the most interesting reaction a horror movie can create. Because Undertone isn't just trying to scare you, it's trying to give you something to think about way after the lights come up. And if you enjoy horror that leans into atmosphere, strong sound design, and filmmaking techniques that build tension through suggestion rather than explanation, there's a lot to appreciate. But if you prefer horror that clearly spells everything out by the end, this one might leave you scratching your head. But for a $500,000 film that traps you inside one house and builds its horror almost entirely through sound, space, and tension, Undertone is a pretty fascinating piece of filmmaking. And honestly, the fact that people were still talking about it during the credits tells you everything you need to know. Appreciate you going on this film journey with me, and as always, be real.
We should stop listening.